this is really insane, and I really appreciate you being here, and I also hate it, so bear with me. As a journalist, nothing's ever finished. As a creative person, nothing's ever finished. You just have to hit send. So I'm going to be reading maybe the first half and then riffing the rest, but it's there. I got some visual cues too. So thank you so much for being here this early. I'll just jump into it. Okay, so a lot of people ask me why I became a journalist, or whatever sort of genre storyteller I am in the moment that they meet me. And I often think they expect like an origin story akin to a hero's journey, or some sort of moment trapped in time of like a child yearning to make the world a better place. But the truth is a lot simpler than that. I got into journalism because I've always loved to gossip. Wait, what? Okay, sorry, it doesn't show up on the screen. That's me. My very first word in English was the word hi, and my mother said I'd be, walking down the street with her in my stroller, waving and saying hi to strangers. I lived in a multi-generational household, and we had people constantly coming through for coffee or a drink at night, dancing. Anyone that would walk in, hi, 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 that's all I knew how to say. Shortly afterward, I learned the word who, and I remember hearing stories of, my mother, grandmother, aunts, older cousins sitting around the kitchen table, drinking coffee and smoking. It was the 80s. And I would pop my little head up from beneath the kitchen table and just scream, who? Because I needed to know if they were talking about something juicy, who they were talking about. And then eventually that led to the who, what, where, when, why, which are like the pillars of journalism, as you learn in the OG J school. Earring is off. In so many ways, I'm still that very inquisitive, sassy, talkative kid. And I think that's why it makes it hard for people to believe me, whether they're strangers or friends, when I say that I'm actually shy and I hate attention, that I don't like performing, that I'm very nervous to do the CreativeMornings talk at 8:30 a.m. in front of people that I cannot, visibly recognize from a stage. But I think the whole thing is like, there's this whole new don't perceive me trend happening, but it's very true. I don't want to be perceived. I just need to know everything about you. I also come from working class stock. I grew up in a family and community of restaurant owners. I'm Greek, so there you go. My family before that grew up in villages that were rooted in histories of many, many different beautiful things, but also histories of tyrannical rule by the empire du jour of that time. And this comes with a lot of stories of resilience and resistance. My father was born during a civil war, and I often, in my dreams, become my grandmother, who, as the village midwife, was literally escaping into caves at night while shouldering her twin infants, one of them my dad, struggling to make do while cracking jokes at the same time and showing strength and love for her family. Needless to say, first and second gen American kids carry a lot of trauma, and it makes us and our parents, can I curse? Okay. It makes us, our parents, our grandparents, our descendants pretty fucking goofy. We're silly, we laugh through all the challenges. No one is safe from a nickname. You'll have an inside joke that will likely outlive you. But these jokes often begin as gossip. And it's a way to make light of a hard truth, while often revealing important secrets that sort of demand being passed down through generations so that they too can survive. There's plenty of academic research out there that has documented ways in which gossip keeps communities together, especially women. It's information sharing. It's not just, your petty gossip. it's harboring the truth and it's keeping it safe. And it's there so that it will eventually be unveiled when it's time. It's also another form of oral history. What a lot of people don't know is I studied journalism in undergrad, but I got my master's in folklore. I often tell that to older people, and they're like, "You mean you studied Bigfoot?" and things like that. But really, it's like another form of ethnography, very rooted in oral history tradition. So I just furthered my journalism that way. So oral history is a form of storytelling that is nuanced, and it's often spun into such clever ideas that they are never to be forgotten. It also becomes a form of power, which is really what journalism is. And journalism is supposed to take power away from the systems and into the hands of people. There is a Greek word for journalists that I find so beautiful. It's demosiografos, which literally, demos means people, and graphos is writer. So it's writer for the people or of the people. So I guess you could add that, gossip queen and writer for the people. I think, in the bio that Joel read, I created this little sort of shtick to describe what I do as dispelling myths in the global South. That is because there's no dearth of diversity here. Growing up in an immigrant family and gravitating toward other first-gen kids as my friends and community all through adulthood, it took me a really long time to understand that I'm still a Southerner. I've been here since I was 7. And that's sort of like this one myth that we are homogenous, and we never have been since the colonization of this country. And I've interviewed so many people here in this state, and they come from many different backgrounds in many places around the world, but they're all connected to this place that I call home, that you call home. And so, teasing out and listening to their gossip and what they have to say just brings out all of these beautiful surprises and truths that I try to unveil in my work. I'm sorry if you came here for a food talk. There's really nothing like tasty. I guess I'll get a little spicy. But there's nothing really I'm going to wax poetic about food. I think for me, in general, in media and storytelling, food is often seen as a common denominator. I actually don't see it that way. I see it as something far more sneaky. It's very much my Trojan horse. It's like this big, exciting thing that's presented to people as a grand gesture with all these other bits hidden inside that you least expect. What I'm really interested in my work is this sort of negotiation that is happening in our communities as we continue to evolve and grow and flourish. A negotiation requires communication, and it's like this push and pull that's often feels skewed and unequal, which elicits discomfort and confusion. And it also limits access depending on who you're speaking to. One idea I had for this talk, which was very late in the game and I couldn't get it together, but I wanted to come up here and deliver the entire 20 minutes in Spanish. And for those of you who couldn't understand it, you would have to listen to headsets and have a live interpreter rework my words into English for you. Which, sounds uncomfortable and unexpected, but it's an everyday reality for so many North Carolinians here living, working, feeding us, building our homes, etc. I wanted to lead into a few of the stories that I learned a lot from by following this trail of gossip and things I had heard in community with other people. 21% of Duplin County out east is primarily Spanish speakers, which is the highest percentage in the state. Very rural, and that's where much of my reporting over the last decade has been, especially the majority of my work during the first 2 years of the COVID pandemic. I collaborated with poultry workers and their families on sharing stories. And this all stemmed from sort of word on the street or the dirt road in out east. Gossip led me to meet Esmeralda, a community health worker, and her mother Marta, shown here, who did not want her identity revealed. Marta is a former nurse from Mexico who now works the line at a poultry plant. And when poultry companies around the country were being shady about COVID, outbreaks in their plants, including the number of deaths that were occurring as a result, the mother-daughter duo began organizing their own communities to keep each other safe. And it was through word of mouth. It was through sewing masks and handing them out in the parking lot, before the early shift at work. And that was until the county health department came to them to get advice on how to reach their own communities months later. They were later paid for this service, and the very first story I wrote about them, their names were completely changed. They did not want to reveal anything about themselves. Fast forward a year later, I kept up with them, and we did a whole story and podcast, and later a live panel in Spanish within the community where there were English headsets for those who didn't understand Spanish, for them to talk about their work and visibilize themselves in a way that they had never before after decades of living here. As a journalist, I couldn't find information from government sources because it didn't exist, meaning it wasn't documented purposely, and it was being purposefully hidden. But the grapevine on the chicken line led me to help a community reveal important truths. And then later, after I wrote all these stories, they went on to continue and sort of find their calling in the community. It also led me to my hometown, gossip, led me to my hometown of Winston-Salem, to a remote part on the outskirts of the city that I'd never been to. This man right here, Pastor Sostaita, fled a dictatorship in Argentina, and he is my friend's father. And so I met him at my friend's graduation party, learned that he is a pastor with a primarily undocumented community in Winston-Salem. And when there was a huge plant fire that produced potentially very harmful and potentially deadly explosion, where community members had to evacuate, there was no information in Spanish when the folks within the square mile were predominantly Spanish speakers. So they were being told to leave. They didn't know why. There was no information. So Pastor Daniel stepped in, and through that, he told me what little strip mall to go to. I met a Dominican woman who owned a hair salon, and a Mexican man who owns a tire shop with his father, and I produced a story about what they experienced in that time. And then, fast forward to a year, they also collaborated with the city of Winston-Salem to host bilingual information, and partnered with Wake Forest University to create a study to show the impacts that occurred based on not having this information in Spanish. And now the emergency management is taking that more seriously and hiring translators. It also led me to another part of Eastern North Carolina where I got a random call from an editor in England who said that they were investigating the tobacco industry and needed to talk to workers who worked for a particular farmer who is also a politician in Eastern North Carolina. And I knew exactly who they were talking about and exactly who to call. The worker was on a visa. He was still in Mexico, so I WhatsApped him, as I do with all of the beginning of every gossip starts with an audio message, if you don't know. And got in touch with him in Mexico, reported it through WhatsApp audio message until he arrived and his visa started, and continued on. This was later published in Mother Jones in English and Enlace Latino NC in Spanish. And because I really pushed for the fact that I wasn't sure about the access that the workers were actually getting, I can write an entire story even in Spanish, but I don't know folks' literacy or capacity to read thousands of words. This was the Bureau of Investigative Journalism out of the UK who funded this project. we created a comic based off an interview that I did with the farm worker in Spanish that basically says, defending your rights, the history of a farm worker. So it detailed his story in Spanish in easy snippets with visuals that were drawn, and then sort of helped others understand if they had similar exploitation on the job, how they could, which resources to reach. And then later, because I always find that people don't understand as a journalist why I'm even talking to them, or they come from governments that are corrupt, who may not be telling the truth even in the media because it's all connected. I did a podcast where I interviewed my co-reporter, Ben Stockton from the UK, and we did it in English and Spanish so that they could listen while they were working in the field on our job as journalists, who we talked to, how we got our information, and why we were even telling their story, and why it was important. Many of them didn't know that their boss was also a politician helping write bills that would continue to exploit workers in North Carolina. Welcome to the North Carolina legislature, y'all. Gossip also led me to El Salvador. I had heard of 2 teens who were deported from North Carolina and sent to El Salvador, never to be heard from again. These were kids who had come over during the Obama administration, and when they were maybe like 13, 14, and then as soon as they hit 18, there were a lot of ICE raids that they were picking up kids at school bus stops, targeting them. And there was a case of the NC-6 where 6 young men were detained at the age of 18 as a result of this program, and 2 of them had been deported. There's still no trace of one, but I was in El Salvador for a week, doing other stories on so many other hard things, but really determined to find this kid. And this is his grandmother's kitchen table. I ended up on like one of those tuk-tuk carts in a village. It was gossip that made me talk to the lady on the taco stand who told me to go to the mayor's office to look through a book of birth records to find the kid's address. I talked to his parents in Charlotte, but for some reason they weren't able to connect with them there due to like internet access. It was also gossip that kept me safe and made me realize that I should not be in that region after dark, which was 4 hours away from where I was staying. And so that was because my driver just happened to call his cuñado, brother-in-law, while we were driving, and he told him where he was, and we heard that information. And it led to an indie cover story that won an award for the Alternative News Weekly about Pedro, who is still in El Salvador, kind of in hiding, while his parents and younger sister still live in Charlotte. But this was a very important story for me because I always felt that the immigration debate was very much focused on what was happening at the southern border with Texas, which is fine, but it also creates a very victimized, exploitative narrative of people when you forget that there are also like North Carolina high school students being affected right around the corner from where we all live. It also led me to one of the hardest stories I ever did. Very briefly, you can look this up on YouTube, and there's English subtitles, but this is a film I spent 6 years working on in Guatemala. There was a fire in a state-run orphanage where 41 girls were burned, and 15 survived, and the rest died. And many of these girls were part of indigenous families that were living in rural areas or on the outskirts of the city and could not, afford basic necessities. And there's a law in Guatemala where if people are loitering, even youth, the cops are allowed to just take them and send them to these homes. And if the parents don't put out an alert within a certain amount of time, they have to go to court to get their kids back. The court is normally in Guatemala City, which is like hours away from these folks' homes. And so a lot of people were fighting to get their daughters out of this place, and many of them died. And the reason was because they had locked themselves in a room, they were locked in a room because they had all tried to escape at one point. And you're talking preteens and like the middle of adolescence. We all know where our heads were at then. And so they were being rebellious, and the room was locked, and one of them set fire to a cushion, thinking that the guards would open the door, and they left it locked for 9 minutes. So there is an ongoing court case in the country of Guatemala against the Ministry of Bienestar, well-being, and the president at the time, and other government officials. But we really wanted to tell the story. I had only read a very brief thing in the New Yorker in 2017 when it happened, and I visited Guatemala a few months later, and with the help of Guatemalan journalists, found parents to speak to and activists, and we highlight 3 girls in the film whose faces we can't show, whose identities we can't reveal, who are recounting what happened, and getting their voices out there. And very much, you know, as a journalist, you have to get your facts right, but you also realize that there's not a lot out there when it comes to the real stories because of this need for it to be factual. Which brings me to my next point. There's a lot of attacks on journalism here and elsewhere. As we all know, there's a genocide happening in Gaza, and many journalists, almost 100 that we know of, have been killed. They're also decimating populations of poets, academics, doctors, people who are documenting things. They're finding written words of deceased folks in hospitals recounting what is happening to them that they've scrawled on the walls. This also happened in places like El Salvador, where a civil war backed by the US government also targeted academics, poets, writers. The descendants of those war are my age, they're our peers. And so that's my spicy take of the day, is that gossip is resistance, it's resilience, listening to people where they're at and having them tell you how they feel and what actually happened is a form of truth. And it's a memory that is often used against us and other people when the documents are destroyed. So as a creative person, I very much try to work through the journalism space, which can be very rigid, and push up against editors, especially US-based ones, to help tell the truth and help bring access and bring voices and give them a platform, because everyone has one. There's no voice for the voiceless. It exists. And free Palestine.
Thank you very much, Victoria. We have quite a bit of time for Q&A, if you're cool with that. So I'm going to run this mic around if anybody has a question they would like to start off with. Thank you. Any questions?
You can ask me about food, too.
There we go. Thanks for your talk. It was very eye-opening and inspiring. So from you being a DJ, what's your favorite song to spin? I just was wondering.
I don't know if I can. All the songs I'm thinking of are disgusting.
Say it.
I have this like really fun Ass and Titties Jersey Club remix. That's my favorite right now.
Spicy. All right, who else?
I would be anise seed because it's polarizing.
I wonder, as an introvert, right here, hi.
Hi.
As an introvert, how do you muster up the confidence to go into a gossipy situation, just like get the tea? Like, how do you do that if you're, I need to understand, I'm not an introvert, but I'm not an extrovert either. But
Yeah, I feel like I'm also, I think the word is ambivert. I don't know. I think I am talkative in spaces that make me feel comfortable, but journalism has really trained me to listen. And that's just by, I think, I grew up speaking 2 languages, and Spanish is my third, and I think I had to really listen to learn Spanish. And because I use it every day in my work, and have since my 20s, I think it just has forced me to just sit and observe and listen. I think the harder part for me, I come from a culture that is performative and sort of like people-pleasing. You have to sort of be on and pleasant all the time. So asking questions was, even though they were always there, was hard. That part of vocalizing has always been difficult. But there really are no stupid questions. One time I got a fortune cookie that said, "There's no stupid questions, just stupid answers." And that's like my motto in life now.
All right. Yeah, coming for you.
Hi, thank you also for sharing. Do you have any stories, or can you describe, as you listen to other people, as you listen to stories, what happens that makes you say, okay, I want to put work behind this. This is something that I'm going to pursue. This is something I'm going to travel to find this person. Like, can you describe that sensation, or do you have any stories around that when something pulls and you say yes?
That is such a great question, and I'm having trouble thinking of like a succinct answer for that. I love that question. I think for me, I'm a vibes person. And so I think it's very much like you can feel when somebody else feels something, and you try to get to the heart of why it's making them feel whatever they're feeling. And I also really enjoy making connections. Like, if there's something rooted in another historical thing that I can connect to, because the whole point for all of us as humans is like to connect the dots, and relate to each other in that way. And so, yeah, I mean, I think even like with the El Salvador story, there was a whole section I wrote in that piece about the Reagan administration and, how much funding we gave and how many weapons we provided, and what training we gave the army, and like the residual effects of like the gangs exist because there's residual effects from that war, and why, I'm writing for the indie. Like, why should people who read the indie care about this person in El Salvador and this community and family, and what is connecting us all together, and like why those folks are even here. That kid's parents were on a TPS visa. They were allowed to be here. They just didn't bring him because they couldn't afford to when he was a baby. And then when he finally came over, he had no way to get here legally. So it's like what sort of privileges are afforded and why. And it's all connected to like how we live our day to day. And so I think if I know I can connect it to something or to a feeling that'll elicit like a feeling in another person.
To me, it feels like you explore topics that are a little bit hard. My question would be, what do you do personally to not become mentally handicapped for life?
I'm always gonna have mental problems. I DJ. That seriously has really, really helped me. I know you're out there, you're at a lot of my parties, and like seeing people move and like moving through it and releasing. I also took a complete break from journalism last year. I did a full year of PR, and I saved my money. I went to Greece for a month and just checked out. You know, I'm past 40 now, so I felt like I had the right. And I just, you know, I had to do that. Because I had achieved this really high level of burnout. The pandemic was really hard for people, and I was hearing things that I did not read in the news and trying to make it news, and crying with people almost every week, and working a lot. As a journalist, I somehow had so much work in those 2 years and did not do much sleeping. And so, yeah, I mean, I guess on a daily basis, I'm just like, I love naps. But yeah, DJing has really helped a lot, and just like being able to be in community without talking is really nice. I get exhausted and like not having to make those connections in my head, but instead like do a little wordplay on the decks and like, you know, it's also like sort of like this improv active activity for me, which like works my brain in a different way.
All right, so in the world of dreams and sleeping and naps, you started off saying that in your dreams, you're often your grandmother, who is a midwife, and her experiences. Could you elaborate just a little bit more on that, just how it's connected to maybe your role in this life?
Yeah, I'm not sure. I think I'm really bonded with both of my grandmothers, and I think I have a lot of personality traits from both of them. My mother was born in the States to immigrant parents, and I think she has a very different experience from me because, you know, I don't think she was afforded the opportunities that my sister and I have had, based on like, you know, her path of like actual immigrant parents. My dad is an immigrant, and you know, I was the first to go to college in my family, and my sister followed. And they made sure we had that opportunity, did everything they could, working in restaurants on their feet their entire lives for us to get there. And I have just, yeah, been having like very vivid dreams and almost visions sometimes of like embodying my grandmothers. And I think I often wonder like who they could have been now, and if I'm maybe living out something that they, you know, had an affinity toward. I don't know, but I do think about them a lot. Plus, they were big gossips. Like that's where I learned it all from.
So as someone that doesn't speak Spanish, or we're here in the States, away from Palestine, like you're writing the stories, but the question is, what can we as community members do, whether it's individually in our nonprofits that we might be a part of, or the businesses that we work in and the teams. What, like, as you look at, you're telling the story and you speak the language of the people, but what can we do to contribute or hear the story or hear the gossip of those that don't speak our language to further support them?
I love that question, and it's very difficult to answer. It's hard because I would be lying if I said I thought everything I did made a difference. The journalism industry is also suffering like one of the worst points of history right now, where like there's a loss of jobs, thousands every year. I think it's important. There's very small ways. You know, you can support locally owned businesses. Many of them are restaurants. You can support community groups that may not have the big nonprofit funding. So maybe when you're making your end of year donations, for example, or wanting to partner with a cause, you know, consider like a smaller group. There's many groups, farm worker groups, I'm happy to talk later, in Eastern North Carolina, for example, run by former farm workers who were working in the fields as kids and are now adults, that could use a lot of support and funding versus like, your big ACLU, for example, which also does amazing work but has so much access to resources. I think just start small and pick an area, whether it's local or not, that like you can focus your efforts on. Yeah.
We can take one last question. I think I saw your hand.
Hi, love. You did amazing.
Thanks.
You're so inspiring. I wanted to ask you, what brings you joy today?
LOL. What brings me joy? I mean, it's really basic things. It's my niece, who is 2.5, and she calls me Titi, and she says I'm a bad girl, Titi. It's my dog, who's the moodiest little baby. It's, watching film. Full Frame was back in town, which was amazing. That brought me so much joy. And it's cooking, and it's cooking for people. And then I also just took probably my only vacation of the year. Just got back from Colombia with my friend Laura. And so, yeah, just like we went snorkeling one day, and I was just like in the water for, I don't know, an hour by myself, and that brought me a lot of joy. I think salt water.
One final question, a selfish question for me. So on a scale of 1 to 10, how strong is your urge still when you hear some goss to like lean in and be like, who?
I have really good hearing, so
Yeah.
like 15.
15, spicy. Thank you all for coming this morning. Give it up for Victoria again.